Imagine getting a letter from a killer. Not a confession, not an apology, but a riddle, a game, a threat. Now imagine that letter showing up in your city's newspaper, printed for the entire public to see, because the killer said if it wasn't, more people would die. That was California in 1969. A man calling himself the Zodiac didn't just stalk and kill. He wrote letters, drew symbols, sent puzzles, and he dared the world to stop him. He was never caught. Over half a century later, he remains a ghost in the Criminal Hall of Fame. A murderer whose face was never confirmed, whose name was never proven, and whose ciphers still taunt the most brilliant codebreakers on Earth. This isn't just a story of murder. It's a story of manipulation, of fear, and of a killer who knew how to turn silence into power. So today we break it down, fact by fact, killing by killing, clue by clue. This is 360 Shares TV, where crime meets history. And we bring you the Zodiac Killer. To understand how the Zodiac was able to disappear into legend, we need to go back to where it all started, and examine the world he stepped into. The late 1960s were no ordinary years in California. Vietnam was raging. Protests were everywhere. Charles Manson's cult hadn't yet struck, but the state already felt like a powder keg. People were disillusioned. The innocence of the post-war era was fading. America was changing. And California, especially the Bay Area, was becoming a hotbed of political unrest, youth rebellion, and violence. Into that world stepped a predator. Not just any killer. One who wanted attention. One who craved it. His first known victims were teenagers on Lake Herman Road near Vallejo, California. They weren't doing anything wrong, just parked talking. But on December 20, 1968, their night ended in gunfire. David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were found shot to death. No clear motive. No witnesses. No suspects. The press called it a tragedy. But it was only the beginning. Just over 6 months later, on July 4, 1969, another couple, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, was shot while sitting in a parked car. This time the killer called the police. Calm and direct. "I want to report a murder." They were shot with a 9mm Luger. He hung up before they could trace the line. That was the Zodiac's first true communication. But far from being finished, he was just getting started. Then came the letters, the symbols, the demands, and a wave of terror unlike anything California had seen. After his initial attack, the Zodiac Killer didn't just disappear into the shadows like most serial killers do. No, he wanted to be known. He needed to be feared. On August 1, 1969, newspapers in the Bay Area received 3 nearly identical letters, each signed with the now infamous Zodiac symbol, a crosshair inside a circle. Each letter contained details only the killer would know, details that hadn't been publicly released about the Lake Herman Road murders. And it wasn't just a confession. It was a taunt. "This is the Zodiac speaking. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all." But here's where things get chilling. Enclosed in those letters were ciphers. Cryptic codes that challenged the public to solve them. A puzzle with deadly consequences. If the newspapers didn't publish the letters immediately, the Zodiac warned he would commit more murders. But if the ciphers weren't printed, he threatened further killings. His cryptic writings demanded attention, and they got it. For weeks, experts and amateurs alike scrambled to decode the messages. Finally, one cipher, known as the 408 cipher, was cracked by a school teacher and his wife in just a few days. But the Zodiac didn't stop. No, he thrived in the challenge. In October 1969, another letter was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, with an even more complex cipher, the 340 cipher. this time longer and even more complex. And it remained unsolved for years. Decades, in fact. Throughout the 1970s and beyond, Zodiac sent a series of letters, cards, and phone calls, each one playing mind games with the public and the authorities. He confessed to 37 murders in total, though only 7 have been definitively linked to him. His personal challenge was clear. He wanted to be remembered. And his desire for fame, and his ability to stay just out of reach of authorities, made him a shadowy figure, a specter in the nightmares of police and citizens alike. While some of his letters were cryptic, others were deeply unsettling, like the October 1969 letter, where Zodiac told the San Francisco Chronicle that he was planning to bomb a school bus. By this point, he had turned public fear into a perverse art form. The question on everyone's mind wasn't just who was he, but what did he want? But even with his eerie letters and puzzles, one thing became increasingly clear. Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was a master of fear, and with each murder he left behind more than blood. He left behind questions. Questions that no one could answer. The Zodiac didn't kill for money. He didn't kill for revenge. He killed for attention. And when you start to examine his words, his timing, his manipulation of the media, it becomes clear. The Zodiac was as much a performance artist as he was a murderer. He didn't just commit crimes. He crafted narratives. He fed off fear, headlines, and confusion. Every letter was a statement. Every symbol, a challenge. Psychologists and profilers believe the Zodiac's greatest weapon wasn't his gun. It was his understanding of control. He knew how to grip the city in fear without ever showing his face. He gave the public just enough detail to believe he was omnipresent. Watching, choosing, waiting. He also had a pattern, but it wasn't a killing pattern. It was a communication pattern. Let's break it down. After every major attack, he followed up with a letter, not to confess out of guilt, but to amplify the terror. He toyed with law enforcement, sometimes using fake clues or misleading locations to waste their time. He often addressed the media directly, demanding they publish his letters or face more bloodshed. In some cases he even mocked them. And then there's his use of ciphers. Most serial killers don't communicate. Zodiac did, obsessively. Some profilers believe he was possibly narcissistic, maybe even psychopathic. But above all, he was calculated. He likely had a high IQ and possibly worked in a field where attention to detail was crucial. Military, law enforcement, or engineering have all been suggested. He was also believed to be a white male, aged 25 to 40 at the time of the murders, with a meticulous nature and familiarity with the Bay Area's geography. But here's the unsettling part. For all the letters, all the codes, all the threats, Zodiac never fully revealed his identity, never made a mistake big enough to get caught. And that tells us something else. He wasn't impulsive. He was careful. He was always just one step ahead. He craved notoriety, but he didn't want to get caught. That fine line between exposure and anonymity? The Zodiac walked it like a tightrope artist. But in a case filled with shadows, symbols, and screams, there are moments, letters, and theories that often get overlooked. And they just might hold the missing pieces to the Zodiac puzzle. For decades, the Zodiac case has been examined from every angle. Police reports, FBI files, amateur sleuths, internet forums. But there are pieces of this puzzle that never quite fit. Strange leads, bizarre coincidences, and suspects that vanished into silence. Let's talk about a few. Puzzle piece 1. The Paul Stine case, a break in the pattern? On October 11, 1969, San Francisco cab driver Paul Stine picked up a fare in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Minutes later, he was shot point-blank in the head. The killer wiped the cab down and stole a piece of Stine's bloody shirt. This wasn't the Zodiac's typical MO. No lover's lane, no young couple. It seemed random. But days later, the Zodiac mailed in a letter with that exact piece of Stein's shirt, as proof. Then he said something even more chilling. "School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning." That's when the fear reached new heights. Parents panicked. Kids were escorted by police. The Zodiac had gone from a mystery to a full-blown domestic terrorist. But what's often forgotten is that Zodiac was nearly caught that night. Witnesses saw a man leaving the scene, and police actually stopped him just blocks away, but let him go because the dispatcher had given the wrong suspect description. One miscommunication, and the killer slipped away. Puzzle piece 2. Arthur Lee Allen, the suspect who almost was. No Zodiac conversation is complete without the name Arthur Lee Allen. He was a convicted child molester, owned Zodiac brand watches, lived near several crime scenes, and was named in multiple police reports. In a search of his home, authorities found weapons, explosives, and disturbing writings. Handwriting experts, however, said he wasn't a match for the Zodiac letters. DNA evidence decades later didn't link him either. But suspicion never left him. Allen died in 1992. He was never charged. But was he the killer? Or just a man who liked being feared? Puzzle piece 3. The 340 cipher finally cracked? Or was it? For 51 years, one of Zodiac's most baffling codes, the 340 cipher, remained unsolved. Then in 2020, a team of codebreakers announced a breakthrough. The message didn't reveal his identity, but it did include this line: "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." It was taunting. It was bold. But it still gave us nothing concrete. Just more questions. More smoke. More mirrors. And so, the Zodiac faded from headlines. But not from fear. Because while he may have stopped writing, he never stopped watching. At least, not in the public imagination. By the early 1970s, the Zodiac letters began to slow down. The murders stopped, or at least the ones we could confidently link to him. And then, silence. No arrest. No confession. No closure. But the impact he left behind? That never faded. In San Francisco, Vallejo, and Napa County, police spent years chasing shadows. Some detectives died without ever seeing progress on the case. Others retired, convinced the Zodiac was still alive somewhere watching. The FBI opened and never officially closed a case file on the Zodiac. He became one of the first true serial killers to weaponize media. And in many ways he invented the modern criminal celebrity. A man who could send a letter and suddenly an entire state changed its behavior. Parents pulled their kids from school. People stopped parking in lovers' lanes. Strangers became suspects. He blurred the line between crime and performance. Even decades later, he still captures attention. From Hollywood films like Zodiac 2007, to endless podcasts, books, documentaries, and Reddit threads, his story continues to spread. And it's not just because of the mystery. It's because the Zodiac tapped into something deeply American. The fear of randomness. The idea that you could be targeted by someone who doesn't hate you, doesn't know you, but just wants to be known. His case also changed how authorities work. It led to improvements in interagency communication, since police in different counties initially didn't coordinate efforts. It sparked greater interest in criminal profiling, helping develop early behavioral science. And it highlighted how media can be both a tool and a trap when handling an active killer. But above all, the Zodiac remains a ghost. A man who bragged about killing 37 people. A man whose real number could be higher, or lower. We'll never know. Because whoever he was, he walked away. And he left the world wondering whether we were all just pawns in his game. The Zodiac's greatest trick wasn't the murders or the letters or the puzzles. His greatest trick was convincing the world that he could be anyone, and then disappearing into a crowd of faces. So who was the Zodiac? A failed genius? A sadistic narcissist? A man hiding in plain sight, laughing at every documentary, every theory, every near miss? We may never know. And maybe that's exactly how he planned it. Because the Zodiac didn't just take lives, he took certainty. He took trust. He turned the familiar into the feared. He showed that chaos doesn't always come from outside forces. Sometimes, it walks among us in silence with a smile and a symbol. To this day, he's never been conclusively identified. No charges. No trial. No justice. Just stories. Letters. Mysteries that continue to haunt investigators, survivors, and a world still obsessed with his signature. That simple, chilling crosshair. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining us in uncovering the twisted trail of the Zodiac Killer. At 360 Shares TV, we're not just telling stories, we're digging deeper, one crime at a time. In this case, it's far from closed. What do you think happened to the Zodiac? Do you believe he's still out there? Or did he take his secrets to the grave? Drop your theories in the comments, we want to hear them. Hit like if this story sent chills down your spine. Subscribe and tap that notification bell because next time, we're diving into a case that's even stranger than this one. 360 Shares TV, where crime meets history. See you in the next investigation.